Hello and welcome. If you're joining live or watching the recording later, lovely to have you here. If you don't know me yet, I'm Fabi. I'm a virtual assistant and systems expert, and I support female business owners putting the right systems in place for their business to work with more ease so we don't burn out if we have those solid foundations in place. One of them is our website. As a business owner, it's good to have a website, which I talk about in other videos as well about. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about where to start with upgrading your website. You might already have one, maybe you need to change it. Again, I talk about that in a different video. But either way, if you're starting out new with a new website, or maybe you're upgrading your current one because you've developed and things need to change and your website needs to represent you more, so those changes need to be made. The big question comes where to start with your website, because there's so many things to consider. And you might know that feeling of having your to-do list sitting on your having your website update sitting on your to-do list for a really long time, but it just doesn't get done. It's constantly kind of in the back of your mind, and you need to do it, but actually it feels really overwhelming, really daunting. Maybe you don't have time, but overall maybe you have that feeling of I just don't know where to start, and that's why we keep procrastinating and pushing it back and back and back, and it just doesn't get done. So I think we've all kind of been in that situation, and we know what it feels like, and that very overwhelming and daunting feeling. So that kind of inner sense of something's holding you back. Always good to identify that. But it's that feeling of where, a lot of the times they're feeling where to even begin, because it's such a big project, and sometimes we dip in and we do a little bit, but then it feels chaotic. So it's like a structure missing. So for me, it really comes down when we start with a project like a website. For me, the key lies in preparation, really preparing well and putting really solid structures in place that will allow us to build the website with much more ease, so we're not super overwhelmed in the process. And I have a free guide that I'm working on that goes really much more deeper into each steps of setting up your Squarespace website. But I wanted to share a few things to just consider before getting started, to kind of give you that little nudge of the first things to put in place. So as I said, it really lies in that preparation work for me. So one thing to kind of start with is to make a plan. And with that, I would always start with doing a bit of a checklist. So just taking a piece of paper, writing everything down that possibly needs to be done, anything that comes to your mind. And it might not be everything, there might be more bits in the end, but just starting to write down everything that needs to be done. That can be the first step, because then you have something that you can always come back to, you know what you're working on, and you can even categorize it a little bit, the first bits that need to be done and then what needs to be done later. And again, I do that a little bit more in that guide that I'm sharing, with 10 steps to do. But having really a checklist with everything that needs to be done is really helpful to give you some guidance. And then just starting with gathering some ideas, really making it a creative process, starting to look around, what are other people doing, getting some inspiration. This isn't about copying. This is really just getting a feel about where you want to head with that website, to really, because ultimately it's a very personal project, but to really get a feel of what you want your website to feel like. Because otherwise we kind of don't really have a vision. It's good to, same with the kind of business goals, it's good to have a vision so we know which way we're going. And then ultimately starting with collecting some resources. Collecting resources and kind of content that you might have, bringing everything together, gathering it. Again, it makes it much easier later when you have everything in one place. It's different things collecting your fonts, your pictures, but also any kind of copy text that you've already written for your website. Starting to bring that all together. And also with that, because obviously talk a lot about Squarespace websites. Have a look at the templates. So when you're starting out, you can choose a template. With Squarespace, you can't change it later, so you kind of have to stick with that one, but afterwards you can still individualize it a lot. So don't worry too much about it, but get some inspiration off their templates, because that's where it's so great. You don't have to do it all from scratch. You can see what they have, what kind of feel you like. So exploring it a little bit. Again, it's that part of kind of making it a little bit more of a fun process. So it's not a serious project, but actually kind of an enjoyable experience. And then just looking down my notes so I don't forget anything. Yes, so making a project plan and dedicating time to it. So it's kind of coming back to that checklist again, seeing what needs to be done, and then creating a time frame in which you want to do it, maybe lay it out a little bit. What are you working on each week? So it's not that overwhelming project anymore, but we chunk it down into little pieces. And with that as well, allow a little bit more time, because we tend to think we can do everything in a weekend. Let's just do a whole website in a weekend. Usually that's kind of when stress kicks in, because we're trying to do everything straight away. We haven't done the kind of prep work, but we're diving straight into designing the website, and then it's a little bit all over the place. So really making a plan, what comes first, what do I need to do first, like the prep work, and then what comes later. And again, I go a little bit deeper into that in my guide, where I break it down a little bit more. But yeah, with that, allowing more time. So being really realistic, and with that, I always say as well, it's not just your business, really consider as well your personal life. What time do you realistically have? And usually that's, not just your work time, but, any other commitments outside of work. Realistically, how long are you working in your work already? Do you really have that time capacity to work multiple hours on it? Or is it maybe just half an hour here and there? But really being clear on that, and then actually dedicating time to it. I think that's really key for any project that we're working on, really dedicating time to it and committing to that as good as we can. Obviously there's, things that some weeks it might just not work, but again, that's why I'm saying, take into consideration other commitments, especially summer can be quite busy, or maybe when it comes more to autumn, there's a lot of more work coming up, as well as your own well-being, really considering all of that when you plan this out. So rather allowing more time so you don't stress yourself, because usually when we start stressing ourselves, it gets overwhelming and we stop and we procrastinate. So making this plan and dedicating time slots each week when you can work on it. And then with that, it's really easy now, because you've made your checklist, you made your plan, and as soon as you come into that space, you're not all over the place of, what I'm actually doing, but actually you can come back to that plan and that checklist that you've made at the beginning. So these are just like a few points to help you make that initial start. As I said, I go a little bit deeper in my 10-step guide, where I guide you through the different steps and preparation work to really prepare for successful, website setup. But they have all that preparation work in place, because as I said, once we've done that, the setting up is really easy and it doesn't need to be overwhelming and stressful. Having said all of that, my last kind of point with it is make it a fun process. Really make it fun. Because it can get really serious and then maybe a little bit tedious and boring, but actually creating a website can be so much fun. And as I always say, it's kind of that representation of you and your values, but that then often ticks it over into making this really serious and this needs to be perfect. But actually, nothing is set in stone. You're working on this, it doesn't need to be like this forever. I think sometimes we get caught up in that feeling of this has to be perfect, this has to be forever. But actually, this is a starting point. You can always tweak things, you can always work on those, and things will develop over time because you and your personality and your work will change. So your website will also change. So taking that pressure off a little bit, it does not need to be perfect. It's also a work in process. You want to kind of get that initial structure, but over time you're going to add resources, you're going to add more things. As I said, you're developing, so you might want to change some things and add more resources and videos or whatever you've been working on to it. So we'll change. So taking that brush out a little bit, make it a fun process. You know, light some candles while you're working on it, or put some music on and have something nice to eat with it, and just make it like an enjoyable experience. Even like cozy up on your sofa, so it doesn't need to be the serious work on your website, but it can actually be really enjoyable. And then I find with that, it also translates into your website. You know, you want to bring your personality into it, and otherwise it can often get a little bit dry maybe. But you know, your clients want to see you within your website, so you need to enjoy it as much, you know, whilst setting it up. So I mentioned my guide that I'm sharing. If you like it, as soon as it's available, just comment website underneath, and I'll make sure you get the guide. So I kind of display more 10 steps to help you prepare a really stress-free website, Squarespace website setup, which will hopefully be a good guidance for you to make this a much easier process, and it doesn't need to be too stressful. But I hope the tips today were helpful. Just to summarize them a little bit. So we started with a checklist, then gathering ideas, collecting some resources, and then making a project plan and dedicating time with it. And with that, you know, we want to allow time and make it a fun process. So there's a few things to consider when kind of getting started, and when planning it out. And I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, as always, let me know. As always, I'd love to know any insights you have from today's training. So again, let me know in the comments. And thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you again soon in another training. Take care.